This is the OverReaction podcast.
Josh, my man.
Jeremy, my man, how you doing?
Good. How you been?
I've been good. I had a good time down in Florida with my family for the holidays.
For real?
My very Jewish mother was upset that I didn't spend enough time with her while I was down there, but she'll probably listen to this podcast and yell at me about that comment.
Did you eat enough? You do look skin and bone.
Yeah, exactly. Meanwhile, I've gained like 20 pounds in the last year.
Josh, you wear it well, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's because you can only see the top half of me.
Look at the backyard on that guy.
I love your impressions.
Yeah. So what have you been up to? Like, let's just dive in. Where'd you grow up? Where are you from originally?
I grew up in South Florida, like Coral Springs. It's a city outside of Fort Lauderdale. Was there for 18 years, and then for some reason ended up in North Carolina for school. Did my undergrad here at Duke, and I've lived in Durham ever since.
So do you have a white belt and white shoes? Sorry, anyone from South Florida, Mike, you got white belt and white shoes on.
Like, I'm not that cool, right? Like, you have to kind of be stylish to wear that thing, and
Yeah,
I can't. You also have to be taller than 5'9", so I don't have that going for me. But
yeah, and I guess now you got to be over like 70 or something like that. No. That I guess that fashion really come in. Like, there's a lot of like singers and stuff that do that now.
Yeah, you have to be either over 70 or like a really cool guy from somewhere in Latin America in South Florida to wear that. Yeah,
bingo. They can pull it off. I can't pull off. Let's be honest about anything. Right? So I try to wear black all the time. Like covers up a multitude of fashion sins, as a good book says.
Yeah.
So why'd you go to Duke? Like, what was it about Duke besides the basketball? Because it wasn't for the football.
It wasn't for the basketball or the football. I mean, I've been a computer nerd my whole life, right? And so it's funny, like I was able to get free tickets to all the games, and I went to like one basketball game my whole undergrad. It was totally wasted on me. I went there honestly because it was free. I didn't grow up with like an incredible amount of money. And so they had really good scholarships. And so came up to Duke, and I was like, I remember I took the train up, right? Because a plane ticket was too expensive. It was like
for real.
15-hour train. Oh yeah, man. It was bad. And like one leg was on a Greyhound.
Oh wow.
So, I'm grateful to be here today. So it was, I don't know. It ended up being one of those decisions where it just like kind of makes sense, but it has a fundamental impact on your life. Right. I don't think I'd be who I am if I hadn't stepped out and traveled across 3 states and away from my family for the first time in my life to do something like that. Yeah.
No, I hear you. I grew up so I was born in the States. My dad was down here. He's Canadian, and he came back to get his MBA at school down here. And then I was born here, and then because he got married, went back up to Canada when I was like 10 months old, so I don't remember it.
Yeah.
And then just, and then came back down for school. So, but Canada's not that different, right? Some people call it 51st state. It's been referred as that for like decades, right?
Right. I don't know how conflicted you feel about recent politics, but I could imagine having bounced back.
I don't really care. Like,
me neither.
I have a lot of fun with my Canadian friends up there, and I'm like, come on, dude, you guys don't even have an army anymore, like, right? So it's kind of true. Like, you're next to the United States, so you don't really have to. They're your giant market, so you just have it a little easier in Canada. I'm gonna get. If I have any Canadian friends that watch this, they're going to get really mad at me. But I'm like, I grew up in Canada, so I know exactly what it's like. It's
right.
You don't have to spend almost anything on military. You don't have to spend a lot of money coming up with a super diversified economy
Right.
that if it was on its own, not next to the United States. So I'm like, I mean, it's never going to be the 51st state. That's just blather and having a good time and negotiating tactics and all the other kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I love ribbon. I'm like, going, so.
Just to cover the goat.
But it's not much difference, right? Like there's actually, like, my first time in Louisiana was a way bigger culture shock to me than when I moved from Canada to the United States.
You're talking about like Cajuns are different from Quebecois, kind of?
Yeah, well, the Quebecois, brother. Like, come on, man. Now you're gonna get me in trouble. You got me start telling like French jokes and stuff like that. Like, oh, brother.
Well, I mean, you were talking about Louisiana and Canada, and I was like, okay, well, what's
Well,
that?
yeah, but I grew up way east Canada. So no, way west. Sorry. So east. So the Quebecois, like the French is different. So it was interesting. So growing up in Canada, when you grow up in the non-French speaking, which is the vast majority of the whole country, you're kind of annoyed that you have to take 4 years of French because there's no one who speaks French around you, like
Right.
anywhere.
That makes sense.
You have to go 2,000 miles to the east.
Yeah.
And then every cereal box or food box or everything else has French on it as well, which is fine. You just read French. It's just one of these things, like, as a kid, you're like, this is just kind of weird. It's supposed to be cool, but it's just kind of weird. And then when I was in France, for a couple conferences, medical conferences in France, and I was down in Nice, and we're driving, and we're getting a taxi driver, and my French is pretty bad.
Sure.
And I've got the French Canadian accent. So this French cabbie, thought I was from Quebec, and he's treating us really bad at all, because we're American. And then when I started, he's like, "You speak English, no parle anglais or whatever," and parle anglais, and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm actually from the United States." He's like, "Oh, I thought you were from Quebec," and I'm like, "Well, what's the problem? Wouldn't you like him?" He's like, "No, we hate people from Quebec." And he just went on and on and on. He's like, they've wrecked our French culture, the language, they sound like gutter, it's just going on and on. But when he found out we're from America, he's like, "Oh, you guys are great. That's cool."
Okay, cool.
I didn't know that.
It was a rival.
I guess.
Right.
I had no idea. But yeah, I mean, but the culture from like English speaking Canada to the rest of the United States, it's not that different. Like, it's just like everything is all it is the money looks a little different. The exchange rate was really different. And like the traffic lights were sideways in Canada as opposed to up and down. Right.
Yeah.
And outside of that, it's like the same thing. But I went down to Louisiana, I mean, in New Orleans, I'm like, can't even understand what half these people are saying. And what are you eating? And, it's just like, it was really, really different.
Yeah. That's awesome. So
United States, it's interesting. When I was growing up in Canada, they would talk about in our social studies.
Alberta or where?
Yeah, Alberta, so south of Calgary.
Medicine Hat kind of area?
No, not that far east. So
Okay.
Lethbridge. So if you go like about an hour west to Lethbridge and then go down south of Lethbridge by like 29 kilometers, what is that, 18 miles or something like that? Little tiny farming village out in the middle, absolutely nowhere. So we had
the reason I know Lethbridge is because there were a lot of satellite companies that for some reason operated out of Lethbridge. I have no idea.
Really?
Yeah. Well, in fact, there was a satellite constellation back in 2012 to 2015 called Blackbridge that was operated out of Lethbridge. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The Canadians love their geospatial.
Well, the farming is huge. Like a friend of mine, he took over a really big ranch. It's Nelson Family Farms and Ranching, massive in southern Alberta. So that's all. It's livestock. It's canola fields. It's wheat, winter wheat fields, and it's huge. Up by Tabor, there's massive amount of corn growing and sugar beets and all that stuff. So yeah, we're gonna have to get into farm shots in a second because that's gonna lead into that for sure. So
Totally.
Yeah, but it was interesting growing up because, of course, every country thinks they're better than other countries, and so we'd hear that Canada is so superior to the United States because we have a mosaic culture. We allow everyone to keep their culture. They can speak all their own languages, whatever. In the United States, they force you to learn English or whatever, right? And they're like they are a melting pot. I remember growing up going, well, that's I don't know if that's better or not,
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
I don't think
It
maybe
makes
not
it easier.
a
Yeah.
balkanization approach to a country is maybe not super great. So now you're getting all these people pushing back on stuff, and I'm like, hey man,
Yeah.
I think everyone should. If you're in Canada, learn English, or if you're in Quebec, French. If you're in France, learn French. If you're living in
Right.
Germany, learn German. Whatever. If you're in the United States, just to function and remove the friction, learn English. Keep every culture, all food, religious beliefs. Like, please do whatever you want. But yeah, just to make it easy for you, just pick up
Yeah.
the language.
Yeah.
Same in Japan. You go to Japan, as hard as that would be, I'd learn
Totally.
Japanese.
You can keep your Yiddish. In fact, we encourage it, right? But it's
Oh,
just
for sure. Yeah,
yeah.
don't be a schmuck.
Yeah, exactly.
Speak the
Exactly.
language,
I
right?
could teach you, well, a few worse things than schmuck, but that would be it.
Yeah, my dad's side of the family's Jewish,
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
so there's a little bit picked up a little bit, So I grew up eating matzah like crazy, like constantly. And then
Not that good.
and it and then we had I still love matzah. I'm just low carb now, so I don't eat it as much. But I love it.
That's so funny, man.
And matzo ball soup and knish, love it all. But it's just so not healthy. So I'm like, so corned beef I'll still rip through like there's no tomorrow. Like
Awesome.
just
Awesome.
if I can find it, we finally have a really good kosher deli here in Salt Lake, called Feldman's,
Mm,
and
mm.
it's so busy because it's about the only place in the whole state you can get it. So
We
anyway,
we don't have any kosher delis around here, and I remember one time it was like 10 p.m. in college, and I was just like, man, I really need a cup of matzo ball soup. And I called every deli around here. There was a place called Groucho's Deli, and I was like, this place has to have matzo ball soup. And they were like, no, we have ham sandwiches. You want one of those? And I was like, all right. There's
is it kosher?
that. Well, I don't even keep kosher, but it was like,
Oh no, I don't.
like
Yeah,
I just wanted a cup of like, what I remembered
yeah,
from
yeah,
my
yeah.
childhood.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
most of my family is reformed, so they're eating lobster, and my
Yeah.
cousins and stuff like that. I think I have a couple in some of our families. Most of our family, my dad's side, didn't make it out. Like if you see a Bickman, all related. There's just grew up in my dad's side. They were in Ukraine, got wiped out by the pogroms, by the Tsar. Then when the Bolshevik Revolution went to Germany, not a really good idea at
No,
all. And a
not the
few made it. A few made it. Our line made it out to Baltimore. Some went southern down to Brazil. Most went to Baltimore, and then almost all of those made it in Canada. There's not many of us.
At some point,
But
you got to go meet the Brazilian Dickmans just to see what they're like.
Portuguese, man, that language, like Spanish, I'm decent at understanding. Can't speak it super well, but I can read it and understand it pretty well.
Yeah,
The je, and I'm like,
I
I've
can do
lost.
it.
I've lost what's happening. I don't know what's happening.
Well, a good chunk of the team at my company, Gradient, is based in Brazil, right? For the most part, we
Really?
all speak in English. Yeah, about a third of the company is based in Brazil, between São Paulo and a couple different places.
Oh wow, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Do you make it down there very often?
No, I used to. I mean, when we sold my last company, I was down there for 6 months, straight, pretty much,
Wow.
between São Paulo and Belo Horizonte.
So how's your Portuguese? Is it pretty good?
Sucks. I can't speak a lick of Portuguese, but I can understand it. So, like, if I hear someone talking, I know what they're saying. But if I speak back, no one has any.
Well, why is it so hard to do that? Because it's true. So, like when I was in Israel for like 5.5 months,
Mhm.
I could start understanding Hebrew to a decent degree. It wasn't great. I could do some stupid stuff like, Eifel autobus and Ifshir
Yeah.
lickable yogurt and mahasha. I'd go
Yeah,
rip through some of
yeah.
this stuff, but I could understand it. But speaking it was like, it felt 10 times. I don't know what it is about that in your brain. You can understand, but now when it comes to formulating and saying something back, why it is so maybe it's just me, but why it's so difficult to do that. I don't understand the neurolinguistic issues.
I've read a lot about this, and I mean, it actually is like strikingly like machine learning, right? Where it's like
Mm.
there's this analogy of the human brain where like things are essentially like laddered connections, right? Where it's like if I say the word apple, you think fruit, right? Like if I say a word in Hebrew, right? Like you might know what that corresponds to as an object. You don't have to map it onto the English and then map it to a bus, right? Or whatever it might be. And so human memory and thinking is based on these like branching connections almost between objects and concepts. One of the reasons AI in healthcare is really cool is that doesn't exist. There's not a distance between apple and bus, right? Like those two things are like reasonably as connected as apple and fruit, if that makes sense in the way an AI
Yeah.
works. And so AI is really good at spotting things that are unintuitive or non-intuitive to human beings because of that. So when you're looking at like a radiology image as an example, you know, you're having the mental context of, okay, I'm evaluating this patient for a stroke, right? But then you're going to miss the incidental nodule at the top of the lung, right? Because you're looking for
That
those
makes sense.
concepts. And AI does not have that connectivity of concepts. Like everything is almost equidistant in memory. And so it'll still spot that nodule at the end of the day.
That's cool, man.
It is cool. It
So,
is.
so what did you go to school? So you went computer science? Was
I
that,
did computer science, electrical engineering, and math. Yeah.
dude?
I'm not good at any of those, to be clear, but I at least learned.
No, yeah, I went to school. So I started out in biology. I
Mm.
wanted to be a marine biologist, and then I found out what they make, and I'm like, no way in the world.
My wife,
Like, I'm gonna do what?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
How
I
long
know
in school?
exactly what you mean. Yeah, and then you have to
So
go
I
to
was
the
one. Yeah, so it was one of the early ones. Like, I can't go into depth for that. Like,
yeah.
that's like that. I still love it, so it's very interesting to me. But so then I moved over into political science, and I
Mm.
was about a semester away from graduating. And I looked at it and said, I don't want to go into politics, and I don't want to be a lawyer. Like, well, what the heck am I going to do?
Yeah, right.
I'm maybe one of those people that says, hey, do you want fries with that? Is that the job I'm going to get when I'm out? Like,
Right.
so I flipped to economics. And at
Mm.
BYU, where I went, the economics program, they didn't have a master. Well, there's no such thing as actually masters in economics. You do bachelor's or PhD. There's no masters. And BYU had this insanely good, hyper competitive undergrad program in economics, but no PhD. So they had all these guys working at the World Bank, looking at the Fed, the Treasury, um, Goldman Sachs, et cetera. And they would come back and do their sabbatical or whatever and teach for a
Mm.
year. Well, they don't want to teach theory. They
Yeah.
want to do econometrics and do Black-Scholes asset pricing models and stuff. So it was all hardcore linear algebra, advanced statistics,
Right.
and doing log functions and all this other kind of stuff with calculus. And I was never really good. Like algebra was really easy for me. I loved it, geometry, but calculus for some reason was a little too nebulous.
Mm.
So I got married, and my wife's like, well, why did you want to? I mean, you're good at this kind of math. You're bad at high level stats and this other stuff. Why would you do it? And I said, because it's fascinating.
It's so cool.
It's fascinating. The output, being able to run a model, run an econometric model and see the interplay between the dependent and independent variables was so fascinating. So I grinded. So I had an A in political science and international relations, just killing it. I could barely maintain like a B plus in
Yeah.
economics. I know I was killing myself. I didn't care because it was just so fascinating. So I know what you mean.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I also had a love for economics. We had this guy that used to work at the IMF was my econ professor, and he did everything in terms of smokes and jerky, right? Meaning like cigarettes and jerky. So like supply and demand, and like
So
the
what you
very
like prison yard.
yeah the
Commerce.
variables he was super funny. Like the variables he used were always cigarettes and jerky as like on any graph in economics, just to make the point that it could be anything, right? Like any two independent variables. And then if you answered a question on the last day of class, he'd throw you like either one of those little Jack Links bags.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
or he'd
Yeah.
throw you a cigarette. Like he'd throw a cigarette into like the lecture hall. And this is like 20.
That's engaging.
Exactly. This is like 2012, right? So no one's smoking anything, the college students are vaping at this point, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like, it was like so weird, kind of outdated, very, very funny.
You know what they call an economist with a personality, right?
What?
An accountant.
I like that. I like that. I do really
Yeah, I was gonna.
like accountant, to your point.
If you were in South Carolina, I'd tell you this joke. I'm gonna tell it anyway. So what do you? What's the number one pickup line in South Carolina?
I don't know. What is it?
Nice tooth.
So mean.
How do you know the? I'll stop. I got.
You're gonna get in trouble.
I'm gonna get. Yeah, I know, but I don't really care. Like you got to make jokes. You got to make jokes. I'm gonna say it anyway. So, I mean, how do you know that the toothbrush wasn't invented in South Carolina?
How?
Because they called it the toothbrush or the teeth brush anywhere else. So, and no, yeah, I think I flipped it around.
I got the point, though.
So the good thing is you can do it. So I've got one like jokes like Mississippi and Louisiana, etc. So it's like Anyway, well, let's jump back in. So you're at Duke. You're doing the triple threat emphasis. Okay, you got to talk about farm shots. How did that come about?
Yeah. I saw my friends going to work for the big companies for the summer. And I was like, is this kind of really what life is? Right. I was pretty used to living like without much. And so I had all these friends that were going and getting $5,000 for the summer at a summer internship. That's how much they were paying. I remember it was nuts.
For the whole summer?
No, I'm sorry. $5,000 per month during the summer.
Oh.
It's like 15 grand. And if you've never had a real job in your life and you're like a 19,
that's real money.
You're like, that's real money.
That's real money.
I can buy an Xbox, right? I can buy a bottle of
I could buy a whole pack of smokes instead of my professor throwing one at me.
I can feed for 10 years. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
And I think I had always wanted to be an entrepreneur of some sort. And I didn't want to do something normal, if that makes sense. And so I started doing this research. I started reading online these papers that were written by NASA, in the 60s and 70s on like how to do vegetation analysis off of satellites, right? And so they figured out this way that you could detect how healthy a plant was based on how much light it absorbs or reflects, right? We learn in basic biology, like, hey, a healthy plant's going to absorb light, make a carbohydrate, and unhealthy plants, so by proxy, going to reflect that light, right?
Yep.
But back in the 60s and 70s, there was like no satellites to really look at, right? There were very few. And so in 2012, I kind of asked myself the question of, well, are there more satellites now? I remember typing that into Google, being like, how many satellites are there, right? And it turned out there were now a ton, right? And there were
space junk.
Space junk, but also what happened was you had what used to be these big school bus-sized satellites were now shrunk down to the size of like a shoebox. And so rather than launching one satellite in a rocket, every rocket launch could contain 80 or even 100, right? And so you basically just had, instead of like the one satellite that's going to last for 10 years and is a super spy satellite, we essentially could launch 100 satellites that'll last for a handful of years, but do the job well enough, right? And so part of that came from just like the miniaturization of the electronics. Part of that came from SpaceX lowering the cost of launch, right? Meaning like now it wasn't just governments that could afford to really launch stuff into space. And so I was like, okay, can we apply this research that was done back in the 60s and 70s on this kind of new platform of satellites that are out? And it turned out the answer was yes. So I went and I raised $50,000 from some folks that had worked with Duke, and I was scared shitless, right? Like I don't know
I
if
bet.
you're 20 and someone hands you 50 grand to like invest and do something with, you're like, if I lose this money, I'm going to prison, right? It's like a venture capital. You don't understand anything that's going
No,
on.
if you lose someone $50,000, you go to prison. If you lose someone $50 million, they ask you, "Well, what's your next gig? We can invest."
Yeah, I did not realize that that's how venture capital worked. And so, I remember calling a satellite company, just like cold calling them. It was this guy based in Canada at the time. And I said, look, I want to buy some of your satellite imaging. Like, I have this idea. I just raised some money. And he goes, our minimum contract's 250 grand. And I was like, well, I have 50 and I can't even give you all of that. Right. And so I remember I would call this guy like every 2 or 3 weeks until finally he was like, yeah, whatever. Like, let's do a pilot. And the company really took off from there. I mean, I got all of my friends together. Every Saturday we'd write code. I would do sales. And eventually the company made it to like 100 grand in revenue every year, my junior year. So then we rented a house for the summer after my junior year and just packed like 10 teenage boys in there. It was disgusting, man. It was like the grossest place I've ever lived in my life. I remember there was like, we would buy bulk food because we didn't have that much money as a startup.
Yeah.
And a mouse, like we caught a mouse on the video camera, like eating the rice that we had. And instead of catching it, we were just like, oh, that's Richard. Like we just named him, right? Just like he lives here.
That's awesome, man.
He just lives here now with us. And the company really grew from there. We eventually grew it to almost a couple million in ARR, and then had a pretty solid exit to Syngenta, which is a big Swiss agrochemical company. But back to you talking about Canada, we ended up growing from this, one algorithm that would just tell you, the farmer in the morning, hey, you have a disease here or back here, etc. To all sorts of stuff. So like we had one algorithm that would detect canola flowering based on the yellowness of the crop.
Yeah.
So you could time fungicide applications based on when the canola was flowering. We had all these like families of algorithms that we developed, which were some really cool, intense math, right? It was basically like doing math on geophysical parameters and trying to like predict things. And so, reflecting on my first startup, it was probably the most fun I've ever had, but I think without the wisdom that I have now, it was pretty anxiety inducing, right? Like you just feel like you're building an airplane as you jump off a cliff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so why not something else in ag, which is so freaking awesome. Everyone overlooks it. Why healthcare?
My co-founder for both companies, Farm Shots and Gradient, was an MD PhD, right? So it was weird that I'm working in medicine now than it was that he was working in farming. But I think, I mean, the way this company got started was we were like, okay, we're able to detect disease on satellite images. Let's go ahead and build
For
it.
everybody listening, Gradient Health is the company.
Yes. Yeah.
We'll put a link to it in the details, show notes, and link to your LinkedIn and anything else you want. If you have some sort of Instagram, we'll put it there too.
I'm not hot enough to have an Instagram.
I'm not either. I get people purposely asking me not to follow them anymore. Just want any association. So I get it.
I love it. No, so we were like, okay, well, if you can detect a disease in a satellite image on a farm, we should be able to detect breast cancer, right, in a CT scan. From a computer's perspective, it's the same problem, right? You're looking for an irregularity in some kind of three-dimensional volume of data. So we were sitting there on the couch one night and we're like, well, okay, let's build an AI in imaging. How do we get the data? right, to train that AI. Because it was I called up your friend in Lethbridge to get satellite imaging data. There was no one I could call up really to get my hands on medical imaging data to build an AI. And I kind of paused for a moment there.
Unless you're on the dark web,
Unless you're on the dark web, in which case,
or you're Google and you went backdoor like they did with Ascension. You just
yeah, but I'm talking about ethical quality, right? Sourcing of data.
you want to get technical, do you? Fine.
Yeah.
You want to be all legal.
Yeah. I mean, we can get
Just kidding.
we can get into that, but that is a really big focus for me.
It's a huge focus.
And so I said, wait a minute. Anyone that's trying to build an algorithm that's going to really impact patients and help patients should have access to data at a reasonable price at a reasonable time. And so that's how we kind of chanced upon the problem that Gradient solves, which is there's people that want to build healthcare AI. There is currently no scalable way for them to get access to data, right, at a reasonable price. And so Gradient flipped the problem on its head of building these data sets for medicine, where these companies would normally spend $1 million in a year collecting the data. We went around the world, collected a massive amount of data, de-identified it, and then make it available to the people that are building algorithms, typically for like $100,000 in a week. So it's 10 times cheaper and 50 times faster. And off the back of that, we've been really successful. I mean, a lot of the large med device companies are using us, a handful of pharma companies, and then a lot of the AI companies, just pure AI companies in the space are getting data from us, right? But you can think about it.
So obviously the first order problem is to get those organizations that are actually producing the medical imaging data specifically, and then the surrounding contextual data, to trust you. Like, what's the quid pro quo for them? I mean, I'm sure there's obviously benefit to them as well.
Yeah, it's letting them do their own research on their own data, right? It's also about, like, for example, Gradient Health has an ethics board, right? And the ethics board reviews use cases of data, right? We've got all of our compliance in place, right? Like, we've got all of our security in place. And between those three things, hospitals find it pretty compelling. We also help them generate revenue for free patient care or innovation at the hospital, as an example, right? Like, I'm a very firm believer that the value generated by data should go back to the patients from which the data is derived, if that makes sense, right?
Dude, amen. Like,
Amen.
seriously, like, seriously, like, this whole thing, I'm on a big consumerism push.
Okay.
Like, people follow some of my stuff. I kind of get after hospitals and clinics. I'm like, you've got to start seeing your patients as clients.
Yes.
It can't be this. In fact, I was talking to a lady at one of our customers this morning. She's new to healthcare, just brilliant though.
Mm-hmm.
Worked for GE, worked for some big tech companies, and she's coming into healthcare. And she's trying to help their company say, hey, when we're talking to highly sophisticated IT people at a hospital, go ahead, man, geek out, throw those terms around, but stop talking about our data structures and our infrastructure and the protocols to the CFO.
He doesn't
or the
care.
Chief Medical Officer. What are you doing? Like, it isn't going to help. Can you just speak to them? And so it's the same thing when it comes to patients, doctors, nurses. Stop using technical terms. Just talk to them. It's like going into a mechanic and you're like, I know I'm getting screwed. I don't know what they're saying. I don't think a Fetzer valve is part of a car, because I heard that on Fletch.
Well, part of that is like the private equityization, right, of healthcare in a lot of ways. Yeah.
So it's like, hey, if I'm a patient and a hospital's using my data, and then now they're selling my data, can I get a cut of that? I almost thought, like, there should be like a new insurance plan that's based on, hey, if you're willing to share your data with all these different companies out there and health plans, your premium's free. Just free. Just get it. Just we're going to use your data we'll de-identify, we're going to use your data. I'm like, so I love that you said you're the first person I've heard in a long time of any company that says, at the end of the day, the value has to be derived by the patient and needs to flow back to them because they're literally the center of it all. If it isn't for the patient, nothing literally exists. It should serve it, but too often patients feel like they're inconveniencing their doctor, inconveniencing the institution. They have to put, a buddy of mine just tore his ACL snowboarding. Took him 3 weeks to get an MRI. I had to put it around their schedule. Like everything was about them, not him. He's paying for it, but he's also the product.
Yeah.
So good for you, man.
Thanks, man. I mean, if you want to sum it up kind of as a philosophical plan, right, or a philosophical mission, rather than building an AI ourselves, I think the hope would be we could bring 10,000 AI to healthcare faster and make them real, right? So that way we don't have that in 10 years, we have that in 3 years, right? And think of how many lives could be saved by that. The other thing we don't really take into account is AI in this space. First of all, I want to be clear, a lot of this stuff is mumbo jumbo, right? But there's real applications, right? We can get into
I'm going to get into some of that in a bit.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely get
I got a couple of favorite punching bags.
Well, if they're customers, I'm going to decline.
I'm not going to mention any company. Unless they're $1 trillion company, I'm not going to punch.
Okay.
I will punch up. I will never punch down or sideways.
I love it, man.
Ever.
That's the right spirit. Yeah. That's the right spirit. A lot of people think of like AI in the space of healthcare as making doctors more efficient, right? What they gloss over is not everyone in the world has access to a doctor, right? Meaning like, okay, we're all hyper focused in on making MRI scans take 20 minutes instead of 30 minutes with AI, right? No one's talking about the people that don't have access to a professional doctor to read their MRI or read their CT scan, right? Which is going to be 75% of the world, right? And so like if there is a free open source, not even open source, but just like very inexpensive, very open AI out there that can give a standard or a baseline of healthcare, even though humans might be way better, it'll still bring a lot of good to the world.
It's that upfront triage, right? Like if I could speak to a truly, like it's basically an agent, a co-pilot, whatever it is, a clinical co-pilot, and I'm just describing what's happening. It's asking me questions, etc. I take a picture of something, go to them, and they could give me a good idea about, well, this is what it is. Probably do this, but maybe check with your doctor, etc. Awesome, right? And I think what's interesting is I did a call with this executive for one of Uganda's biggest health systems. They're kind of evaluating our platform for patient feedback. So anyway, so we're like, and honestly, if we could grow in Africa and South America, I'd do it 10 times out of 10 over the United States. I'm just sick of the bureaucracy. I'm sick of well, we already do this, or Epic might do that. I'm just like, okay, fine. Like I whatever. Keep doing things the way you're doing. It's interesting to see like mobile payments and communications, how places in Africa and others have leapfrogged the United States.
Oh yeah.
Which is really interesting. And so I see a similar leapfrogging when it comes to the utilization of AI, et cetera, because they have like one doctor for like 25 or 50,000 people or more than that. So they have to. Yeah. It's like people trying to say, well, these African tribes at places, they just need to put solar in. They can't develop natural gas. I'm like, what? Like, that's not, how are you going to do transmission and battery? Like, let's think about these issues. Like, how about they don't burn dung and wood and they get natural gas, which is insanely cheaper and cleaner than what they have, and they can move their economy up. Then they can adopt solar and nuclear really quickly. Like, why can't we allow them these intermediate steps? Can we be cool? Can we be cool? So, but we're seeing the same thing where their middle class is growing, which is their middle class is still way poorer than ours, but they are hungry for information, and especially around healthcare. It's coming in a big way. And so I can see them leapfrogging the United States in terms of what you're talking about. Like, they don't have access to a doctor.
Yeah.
AI could really actually truly help them. It's never
Yep.
going to replace, but it can certainly bridge a gap where it's just way too big right now. It can do this.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
so I
Exactly.
think you're bang on, man.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's like I don't know. I do feel a real. I loved farming because I loved farmers, right? Like I don't know about you, but I've never met a mean farmer. They're probably out there. I just like
If
love
you
their.
work for them, yeah, I worked for
Yeah, I guess I
some.
never worked
Yeah,
for a
but
farmer.
they're like a football coach. They're mean to everyone. They're not
Yeah, and
mean.
they're
They're just
mean.
like they just
They're
we don't
mean
have
to you
time.
because they
Like
love. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, they
yeah,
said we
yeah.
just don't have
Exactly.
time. Like I wouldn't even say it's mean. As your kid, you think they're mean. They're just direct, right? They're just like we don't
Yeah,
have time for this. Like this cow's gonna die, or we got to get out to these sheep or this pig, or if we don't come in and a storm's coming in a week, we got to get this hay up, we cut the alfalfa, we got to get it off, dried and moved. Like they just, I'm sorry about your feelings right now. You don't need to sit there for a little bit. Like this is food. We got to get going. So,
yeah,
but you're right. They're so well. I mean, number they're just critical to the foundation of society.
totally,
Um,
totally.
and they don't have guile. I say that they don't have ulterior motives, guile, deceit.
Yeah,
Like that.
yeah,
That is certainly true. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But what I was getting at was, I loved farm shots because I loved helping farmers. I feel like Gradient's been this, without trying to talk it up as this like world changing
No,
thing.
please do.
Gradient's been this really personal journey of like, okay, how do I like fundamentally make some part of the world a little bit better, right? Like some small corner, whether, and in this case, it's healthcare, right? Like, what is the thing that I can do that moves it all forward by 1%, right? Because then that's meaningful. It's like healthcare happens at the same scale that farming happens, right? If not bigger, right? So it's like if you make farming 1% better, that's billions upon billions of dollars in happiness for people around the world. If you make healthcare better, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even if
Both in
you
both.
build just a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, they're both inelastic. Like
That's right.
demands. Like you have to have food, and
Yeah,
you have to have healthcare. You'll cut out other things, but you're not going to cut out food, shelter, healthcare. So yeah,
exactly, exactly, and they're both
you're
so
right. So
fundamental to like quality of life for your average human.
100%. So what's next for you guys? Like, are there others? I mean, I'm sure that the opportunity ahead of you is so big. Just keep doing what you're doing. But there's anything where you're like, hey, we're actually because you're kind of at the epicenter of a lot of things, and
Yeah,
so which gives you that 360 view to opportunities that are at least naturally organic from where you are now in terms of growth.
I mean, something that's been interesting. I think there's two dynamics going on in the marketplace, like AI and healthcare. One, the models are getting bigger, right? I mean, it used to be your average customer wanted like 3,000 images from us to train an AI. I would say the average is closer to 30,000 at this point, right? And it's very bimodal, meaning there's still a
Mm.
lot of people building like small AI, and there's people building foundation models that can write the report from an X-ray from scratch, right? And those need millions of images to build that kind of AI. And so we see AI getting bigger, and then we also see it getting multimodal, right? It's getting bigger faster than it's getting multimodal, if that makes sense. Like the models are scaling up before they're taking a step horizontally. And when I say
So
multimodal, I'm saying like, okay, I'm instead of just looking at the patient's CT scan and making some kind of judgment call, I'm going to look at the CT scan and I'm going to look at the biopsy report, and then
yeah,
I'm
the path and who knows what else.
right?
Yeah,
More
yeah.
more similar to how a human doctor would do these kinds of things.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
So how I'm sure you come across areas where you say, "Hey, there's no model being built for this. Should we model with, or should we do a joint venture?" Give someone the idea to say, "Hey, we're seeing an opportunity here. We don't want to compete necessarily with our customers because that would be a problem, but I think that's eventually going to be somewhat unavoidable,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
or maybe it's joint venture instead
Yeah.
of."
Like, are you asking what are those models that I feel like are not being built in imaging that could be?
I no, I would do if we stop recording, yes, but I don't know if you wanna.
Well, Jeremy, between you and I'm not going to build those models at the end of the day.
Okay. Well, then, man, have
very
at it.
happy to be the picks and shovels. The things that are
Okay.
missing, I think, in the space, there's a good handful of them, right? One is like Alzheimer's modeling, right? In scoring, like there is kind of no objective measure, right, in Alzheimer's of like cognitive decline, like as a function of your physical brain, right?
Okay.
No one's really doing that. The other thing we're kind of missing in healthcare is retrospective second opinion, meaning we're having a hospital do reads every day, but there's nothing that's going back and looking what did we miss over the last 2 years, right? Or like, given that protocols have changed in terms of how we do this evaluation, how do we do a retrospective on the last 3 years? Part of that challenge in that second one is political, right? Because it's like hospitals almost don't want to know what they missed. You know what I mean? Because then they have an obligation to do something about it. But from an AI company's perspective, that could bring a lot of value to the world. Right? I think the only
I wonder if like the value payment model accountable care actually will cause them to want to do that, where the behavior is right, that would actually
correct.
That's going to intersect from what you're saying.
Once we get to VBC, I mean, I think that's going to be huge, right? And then the third thing that I see out there is contrast agents as a reduction, like reducing contrast agent volumes or even driving them to zero. There needs to be more people doing that.
Having gone through that, I would.
It sucks.
So when
one wants to have cadmium floating around in their blood. Right?
I my shoulder blown up doing this, just destroyed myself, and got a Park City Medical Center, and they gave me way too much radiation, by the way. I mean, the people didn't know. I'm not going to get after them, but they had me stand up, and because I found this after the fact. So I broke like 4 ribs, fully displaced here, 5 in the back. My shoulder blade was shattered into 4 or 5 spots. They're like, we got to do surgery. They couldn't tell if like the glenoid was like into my soft tissues in the shoulder and all this stuff. And so they gave me a standing x-ray in a bunch of different ways. And then like, we got to give them a CT scan. The CT scan, like, we got to get back in with contrast agent. And I'd been in healthcare long enough, like, guys, you light me up like a Christmas tree. But I was kind of out of it.
Right.
But then it was a contrast agent, and that was the worst by far. The worst. I was horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can imagine the same highlighting of blood vessels that a contrast agent does could be done by an AI, right? You do a much smaller dose, the AI magnifies that difference, right? That's another piece that's missing from the marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what, you coming from the outside, but now steeped in healthcare, very conversant in it. What do you see the biggest obstacles to innovation?
And when you say, do you mean innovation in general, or like innovation
just
around adopting AI?
The actual uptake of innovation. Because I'm coming from outside of it, coming in from outside of healthcare, I've never seen an industry outside of like government that fights back. It's so interesting that the whole thing is evidence-based medicine, but it's like, it's more like, even if you can show me this is better, I don't want to have to change what I'm doing.
Correct. And it's like, even if you're better, it doesn't matter if it's not reimbursed.
Yes.
Even if you know it's better, I think it's better, it doesn't matter. Right? If it can't be reimbursed. And so you ask what the greatest holdup to innovation is, I think it's reimbursement. Right? Like that's what has staunched some of the flow of VC dollars into this space, right? Is like the pace at which reimbursement's happening. I mean, the companies that are making money on AI, like the Rednecks of the world, they're charging the patient $40 to have an AI look over their exam as a second read because it's not getting reimbursed, right? It only will get like fully adopted when it's reimbursable.
Yeah, and the problem is a lot of this time you get reimbursed, you got to get together as a group and lobby. I mean, it's pretty messed up.
And so the innovation that's coming from the startups, they can't lobby, man. They don't have enough money for that, right? And so
That's
that's part
true.
of the challenge. That's part of the challenge is like the companies that are producing the innovation don't have the money to seek reimbursement pathways. And that's our biggest challenge. Right.
Yeah, and you can see why so many hospitals are saying, "Hey, we're already paying for Epic. Like maybe Epic will do this sometime." So, or they say they're going to do it in 2-3 years. So,
So we're going to sit on our hands and wait and see what happens, right? Yeah.
bingo.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why some of the biggest innovation I'm seeing right now is in these post-acute areas where the reimbursements aren't
Yeah.
tied to so much, and there's a lot of private pay where they're just coming. There's a company yesterday I was talking to. Some incredible stuff. They they have monitoring and machine vision, and then
Mm,
all these sophisticated algorithms that will be in retirement homes and nursing homes and stuff, and it can predict a fall way before it happens.
amazing.
Not just by obviously them stumbling, like, well, any idiot algorithm, hey, if they're knocking into the wall, sitting to learn and look at colorations,
Gate.
speech, different whatever,
Exactly.
and go, or even behavior like they didn't eat. Like for some reason, this person did not eat lunch. They skipped lunch. They just kept watching Jeopardy or Matlock or whatever, and they just keep going on and on. Like, hey, you know what? The
I
dude's
like that
blood sugars.
you chose Matlock and Jeopardy, right? Two very grandma shows.
Well, yeah, yeah. I could have
I
said Golden Girls or something, but I didn't want to be that obvious. I only want to be mostly obvious. And so they have this thing which is really cool, and the uptake in these nursing homes when they show it is just like a no-brainer. They're
Yeah,
like, no, and there doesn't have to be. There's no reimbursement tied to it, but they're like, this
interesting.
is going to stop this from happening. We can see a way to cut costs immediately. Their family members who are their power of attorney won't yank them out and take them to some other facility and give us a horrible Google review, whatever.
And
And they're
limit
just going
the
through it, and I'm
liability.
like,
Yeah,
yeah. I'm
yeah.
like, yeah, I'll do a joint venture. So we're going to do hopefully a joint venture with them pretty soon. I'm like, yes, because this is just such a no-brainer. You don't have these giant barriers when it makes sense. These organizations will say, yeah, why wouldn't we?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, hopefully you'll get to spend a lot of time in Florida if you're doing it at JV on elder care.
Yeah. What's interesting is that my wife and daughters,
Hmm.
well, one daughter, they love Disneyland and Harry Potter World. They just
Okay,
love
cool.
it. And they're
Yeah.
older too. Like I look, I'm older than I look. My youngest is 22,
Hmm.
um, or turning 22. So Sheila and my wife, they just love Harry Potter Land. I don't know why, and I don't like theme parks. I'm the dad sitting there eating a turkey leg like everyone else go through the line. I don't mind just sitting here talking with the
Wait,
boys. Like,
why
go ahead.
are you such a mudge? Like, what do you mean you
I
don't like theme parks? Who doesn't like theme
I
parks?
just I think it's just because I grew up way out in the sticks. Like I'm so used to not crowds.
Oh yeah, that you get angry at people that walk by.
It, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not what's interesting when I do this kind of thing, people think I'm really outgoing. I'm not. I'm actually an introvert. I know
Hmm.
how to pretend and act in the
Yeah.
moment,
Yeah.
but I don't get energy from crowds. So when
Makes
we go
sense.
to I used to do speaking. I'd speak at hymns or I'd speak at Chime or a William Blair event, and then everybody at the after party wants to, and I don't drink, so I was just like, it's fine. I'm the designated. I've been the designated driver since I was a kid, um, and but I just don't get energy. Like I know a lot of people that are like, Jamie, why aren't you out running? I'm like, I'd rather just go ride my mountain bike or go back to the gym or just hang out, talk to my family, whatever. I'm not. I'm more like sitting in a restaurant with 4 or 5 people eating rather
Right.
than this big kind of event. So it's theme park to me is like this. I don't know. It's just
Well, you also have the worst of the worst people at Disney. You have like yeah. I mean, you have some of the
so
best, right? But
yeah.
Disney has something special in terms of like the creatures that it attracts.
We should pull up people of Walmart, those
I, I
videos.
I love that, but that might be a little too
The
mean.
people of Walmart.
Well, you have to remember, like I grew up in Florida, so like I know what Floridians are like. Like,
I love it though, man. Like
yeah,
I grew up, all my friends white trash. I don't know what it is. Just so I love them. Like it's the end of the world. It's going to be.
They're all messed up, but they're all messed up in a very unique way.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's gonna be Israel, Switzerland, and then just rednecks around the world will be the only people survive. Like they'll just be the only ones. I'm like telling you, like, hey, you don't agree with the rednecks politics? You better have some redneck friends because if something goes sideways,
Yeah.
you're gonna want. They'll have food,
Yeah.
have protection, whatever. You just hang out with, and then they'll know how to fix everything. Like you got to have some redneck friends.
The number of like professional redneck programmers that I know in North Carolina is quite big, right?
Seriously?
Yeah, man. Like there's
awesome.
just rednecks that are just like amazing Linux developers, right? And they all have a Go bag. You know what I mean? It's like you can't take that out of them, right? So
yeah, I have a Go bag. I just don't have a gun in it. I guess I don't think I should tell anyone. But I just growing up in the country, and now I'm up in the mountains.
Yeah.
Just a thought of, the canyon getting closed off or an avalanche happening. I'm stuck in the canyon, and I'm like, I gotta have something. Like there's that's one of the reasons I don't have a Tesla. People are like, oh, it'll be good. I'm like, Teslas are a luxury of the suburbs and urban. Like it isn't when you're way out in the middle of nowhere. I don't want an EV, like a hybrid. Yeah, awesome. Sure. But a straight EV makes me. I can't. It's all about transport. It's all about transporting the energy source. Right. Like if I could take electricity from somebody else, like guys, you have a full tank of gas, you're not worried about flip. I get rid of it because the gas doesn't evaporate almost at all out of the tank, but even the best batteries will leak energy. So if it sits there for like 2 weeks, that Cybertruck doesn't have much of a charge left or not enough. So to me, it's just like, you're like, oh, you're anti-EV. I'm like, no, I'm not. People in city suburbs, man, it's awesome. So just stop pushing it on me out in the sticks because it just doesn't work. I want to make my own biodiesel. I'm not, but
no, we have people like that, right? They'll take like restaurant cooking oil or whatever. Yes. So, yeah, I've seen that kind of stuff around here.
Dude, so are you going to HIMSS? Are you gonna be out there?
Yeah, we'll be out there. So we should definitely meet in person if you're gonna.
Yeah, I'm just because for us, it's like a 4.5 hour drive, and I'm gonna hit the Red Bull Rampage area. Like, because I love downhill mountain biking. I'm not gonna hit the big full Rampage stuff, but I'm gonna bring my bike down, my pickup truck, hit some good jump trails, hit the show, and then hit some more on the way back up.
You should head into HIMSS with like full bike gear on. And just
do you know we used to have a booth? Like when we first started the company.
Know that. Yeah.
We had a booth and we gave away mountain bikes.
No way.
We even had a course set up. We had this 40x40.
That is so cool. It's probably too expensive to do that now, right?
No, because we get really good deals. So we'd buy bikes.
Yeah.
And we'd ride them and then clean them up. So they're brand. If you put new components on, they're and basically so that's the ones we'd give away.
Okay.
But perfect condition, brand new components, clean, just amazing, really amazing bikes worth $7,000-8,000 bucks. But for us, we get them for a couple grand. And so we'd have a little track set up in it. Problem is, we get some guys that were it's always the men. And, I could do something like, guys, take it easy. One guy tried riding it backwards, and he actually almost knocked over the Salesforce booth at the front. He went flying off and so the HIMSS people came over and like, dude, you can't do this anymore. So we stopped for a while. Then we were giving away electric guitars. We had amps set up. We just play because some of us can play. Some of the guys are really good. We're like, hey, just come and play. And the number of people that loved it. And then HIMSS came by and they're like, it's too. We didn't even turn it down. I'm like, you guys are buzzkills, man.
Yeah.
Like,
they were like.
So now we don't have a booth. We just go down there, walk around, and meet people. Like, okay, you I feel like Rocket. You just want to suck the joy out of everything.
Yeah, I remember reading all the policies, and they were like, no clowns or magicians. Like they gave specific examples. We were just like, what kind of conference is it that they're like, you have to have a state-sponsored clown, right? Like it can't. You know what I mean?
Dude, that's amazing. Anything else we should talk about? It's been great. I know you got to go, but anything else about Gradient? What you doing next? Anything we should have that you wanted to talk about, and I just kept driving us in oncoming traffic in the conversation.
You're good. I would say, look, if you're an AI company trying to build an AI in the healthcare space, you're doing something good for the world. If I can be helpful in any way, reach out, right? Not even just like on Gradient's behalf, but like I love helping other entrepreneurs trying to do something good for the world. Yeah, that's what matters.
That's awesome. Well, for sure. So we're going to put a link to Gradient Help. We'll put your LinkedIn page. We'll put your homepage in it. We'll have a link to you in LinkedIn, your personal profile. Anything else? Do you have like a YouTube channel you guys do, or any other?
Yeah, I mean, we really LinkedIn. That's pretty much all of our marketing. I'll give you like an email address and everything like that too.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put it all in there, man. Well, it's been awesome.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
I tell everyone that comes on, I'm like, this is my favorite guest, but now's my new favorite guest. It's been so it's been so funny. I like laughing and telling jokes. So
yeah,
you've been a good sport.
Even if healthcare is quite a serious topic and should be treated seriously, it's like I don't know. You still have to keep it human, you know. I don't know.
Well, that's the truth, man.
Yeah.
Well, have an awesome weekend, Josh. Great catching up, and we'll see you in little under 4 weeks then at HIMSS.
Okay. Sounds good, man. Good to talk to you.
All right, brother.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.